Hello, Internet Universe, and all you COVID homebodies who enjoy art. Welcome to the AGO from home. We have the pleasure today of speaking with two artists in our Artist in the Spotlight series. And I want to welcome Thirza Cuthand and Darlene Naponse for our conversation today. Welcome, beauties. We're going to have a nice casual conversation about both of your practices. But first, for everyone who's watching, I want to make sure they know who you are. So I'm going to do a little intro to both of you. But before I do that, I do want to say that I stand in solidarity with all of the Indigenous and Indigenous First Nations in Canada and in the United States and across the globe who are fighting for their lands, resources, humanity, homes, communities, and that's my form of a land acknowledgement today. So I know both of you for a very long time. I've been curating, or what we used to call programming before we got all fancy with it. Thirza for 21 years and Darlene for 19. When I was going over it this morning, I was kind of shocked at how long, but it also speaks to how long your practices have been going on and how important both of you have been to me and my practice and my own thinking, both in my own work, but also in my professional practice as a curator and a programmer, because I started out in film video world before I entered the gallery world. And both of you are in my first show. Thirza Jean Cuthand was born in Regina, Saskatchewan in 1978, grew up in Saskatoon. I love Saskatoon. Since 1995, she's been making short experimental narrative videos and films about sexuality, madness, queer identity, love, and indigeneity. They've screened in festivals internationally, including the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City, Mix Brazil Festival of Sexual Diversity in Sao Paulo, Imaginative in Toronto, Frameline in San Francisco, Outfest in Los Angeles, and Oberhausen International Short Film Festival, among others that I haven't mentioned. Her work has also exhibited at galleries including the Mendel in Saskatoon, the National Gallery in Ottawa, and the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, and hopefully soon the AGO, which we should talk about. She completed her BFA majoring in film and video at Emily Carr University in 2005, her master's in media production at Ryerson in 2015. In 2017, she won the Natition Foundation Reveal Indigenous Art Award. She is a Whitney Biennial 2019 artist. She's a non-binary butch boy who uses she, her pronouns. She's of Plains Cree and Scots descent, a member of Little Pine First Nation, and currently resides in Toronto, Canada. Welcome.
Thanks.
Darlene Naponse is Anishinaabe from Atikameksheng,
Yeah.
Anishinaabe in Northern Ontario. She was born and raised in her community and now works out of her studio on the res. She's a writer, film director, and video artist. Her film work has been viewed internationally, including Sundance Film Festival, the Toronto International Film Festival, and the Berlinale. Her latest feature, Falls Around Her, stars Tantu Cardinal. It premiered at TIFF in 2018 and had theatrical release. Her previous feature, Every Emotion Costs, screened worldwide and won various awards. Her art-based video work was installed in various galleries and programs nationally and internationally. She's also been given quite a number of kudos for her short story writing. She worked with community leaders and elders to write and ratify the constitution of her community. And she still works on governance and First Nations land human rights work in her community. She owns Pine Needle Productions, an award-winning boutique film, video, audio recording production studio. Darlene has built a wide range of work. She is passionate and pure as an independent artist. She maintains creative control in all her films and continues to work with dedication to the protection of story, appropriation, and respect to imagery, history, and tradition of First Nations people. So welcome, Darlene. So I wanted to start maybe by both of you giving a bit of an introduction to, I was going to start with the gallery context, because I think it's interesting that both of your careers kind of go through the film festival circuit, but then also through the gallery circuit, and thinking about works that you've done that have been shown in both contexts, and maybe a bit about what are the differences. So I thought maybe we could talk to you, Thirza, about your Whitney biennial experience. And I think you showed two works, the Two-Spirit Introductory Special 1999, and then Standy.
Yeah, so at the Whitney, it was different because we were in like a screening at the end of the exhibition. So it wasn't like, there were videos in the gallery, but I wasn't one of those videos. I was in the, like, there's basically Skyho Pinka curated a section of like Indigenous film for, I think it's screened the last 2 days of the exhibition. Yeah, and yeah, Whitney was a whole thing, obviously, because of what happened with Candors. But yeah. I don't know. I like, when I think about like my work in the gallery, like it's interesting because I do make it like for festivals, but at the same time, like I think because they're short works, they play like in gallery settings well. And I've also like done performances that are sort of more within gallery spaces that have video components. And I recently did for Imaginative like a 2-channel installation, which is like specifically for galleries. That's actually the first time I've like done a work that was like specifically for a gallery, which is funny because it turned out to be COVID, and so we can't really go out very much. But yeah.
And what comes into your mind in terms of considering, you know, these different venues? So when you say it was the first time you made it, what does that mean? Is it because it's like 2 channels and you can't really do that in a screening situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the considerations were different. Like when I make a video for a festival, like, you know, you can sit down and watch it, and there's not, I mean, when people are in a gallery, they're usually going through pretty quick. And so the 2-channel installation was like only 5 minutes long, whereas some of my other single channel videos that I've done for mostly festivals are like, you know, between like 12 and 15 minutes long right now. So, and it's just, yeah, it's just, you think of the audience and you think like how hard it is to make somebody stay in one spot that long, especially if there's nowhere to sit, which, you know, sometimes is the case in a gallery.
That's true. It's nice that you're actually considerate of the audience. Not everyone is. Having been through it a lot. Darlene, do you want to just jump straight into the new work that you're working on, the visual documentary? Because I'm imagining that could go in gallery spaces and into screening situations. You want to introduce it and then show a clip?
Yeah, it was, I've been working on this idea for a while, and it actually originated as something that would be in a gallery. I'm like really appreciative and always wanting, like, you know what I mean, the presentation of like a larger screen, not just theatrical, but like being able to be in the space and just feel that, you know what I mean, that screen and it being projected and it just kind of falling all over a wall is really kind of nurturing to me. So when I was thinking of this piece, that's where it originated from. It's become larger and a larger documentary idea, but the idea of like, I do not speak my language fully. It was taken from us. And so when I was thinking about the history of my community, I was just like, I can't do it in English. But then I started thinking about my own work and how the land has always been part of that in a poetic sense, where it's just like letting the land speak. And so that's where this new work is. So it's documenting my community and their history in a way, but just in a visual context where we're still talking about all of those really important things, but we're putting a different lens on it.
Excellent.
So we're going to try this?
Yeah, let's try to screen share and blast out the text.
Okay.
It's always a track.
Okay, so now I gotta make sure that, okay,
It
sorry.
sounds fine.
Am I doing, yes, okay. 1 second.
Yeah, no worries. We have patience.
Just tell me if it's.
Thank you. It's incredibly beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, just brief. Yeah, just the yeah. I really, being able to change narratives as what I mean, as we change, and finding new ways of telling our stories, and so that we're not so oppressed by these these all of the what I mean, the negative imagery that is upon us daily, but looking at the beauty, but also looking at that scarred land, what I mean, that has really taken over our communities, and the history of the industrialism, like what I mean, and the mining and all of those, bringing in the context, but remembering and honoring that strength and beauty of community. So yeah, so that's just a small little piece of a larger project that I'm working
Okay,
on.
so I can't wait to see it when it's finished.
Company. Yeah.
You want to say where your community is, just for folks who won't recognize that landscape?
Yeah, so I'm from Atikameksheng Anishnawbek, which is Sudbury's currently on our territory, and yes, I'm born and raised here, and working from here now.
Thanks. Thirza, I know that in relation to what Darlene showed, you also started getting into deep kind of history of home in works like Homelands, but I also think it's there in reclamation as well. I wonder if you could speak to those works.
Anyway,
yeah. Visual.
So Homelands was kind of it took a really long time to edit that video, but it was like basically my grandmother is or was Scottish, and I'd like never been to Scotland, so my mom and I went and visited Scotland for the first time, and like we went and found like the home where my great grandmother had like grown up in, and just all those really old places, and but also we did like a tour of like my grandpa's, like where his territory was, which was like Montana and Saskatchewan and Alberta. So it was kind of like looking at those two places where like my grandparents had come from, and like which are like kind of make up who I am. But then also we did this genetic testing to see like how they had traveled like from Africa, and like basically like my grandma went up, like her genetically it says that she went up through the Middle East and into Europe, and then my grandpa went the other way. And we can debate how he got from over there to over here, but either way they like went around the world and like sort of like met up back in Laurentian, Saskatchewan. So so kind of as I was doing the research, like I was realizing like there's not just like one territory we're from, like there's many places that we've been from, like stretching back in way into history, and just sort of how how migratory people have been, and then also wondering like as an Indigenous person, like how to reconcile that with like, well, this is our land, this is like this is what we have, or what we're supposed to have. So yeah, and then reclamation is kind of like a more futuristic look at that, because it's like this fictional documentary set like after the white people have gone to Mars to colonize it, and basically it's like taking sort of like what is left after colonization, and like kind of rehabilitating it and reclaiming it, and like making the earth a healthier place again. I mean, and that was just because, I always hear these things about Elon Musk and is trying to get to Mars and colonize it. Like I know he's not going to take like it's going to be like certain people are going to get to go, and like I'm pretty sure who it is. And then also just the fact that like so much money is being poured into these like colonizing space missions, when we could be like putting money into like actually like reversing climate change, or like something like we already have like an earth that works, right? Like why are we just trying to go and like make something else somewhere else instead of like dealing with here, which I think is like a really Indigenous way of looking at sort of life and territory.
Yeah, and I think you both try to hold a certain kind of complexity in that conversation, at the same time as bringing out this philosophy where we do hold the earth as, whether you want to call it mother or however you want to call it, the fact that we are integrated and interconnected with her life as much as our own life. is there present in the work. But some of the ways you use visual and storytelling and the non-linear ways of storytelling of video seems to allow you to hold the complexity of that narrative.
Yeah. 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 I don't know what to say about that.
just like, you're awesome, Wanda. You know what I'm saying. No, I'm just kidding. No, but it's true. I think that you're both pretty unique in the way that you tell these stories. Neither of you are doing straightforward documentary or straightforward fiction in your work. And I think it's the blending of all these different styles that kind of is a stamp on what you do. I was wondering if we could speak about Thirza. I know you have some images that you wanted to show of your work, and I wondered if you wanted to turn to them now and just give us some window into some of your other work, because the breadth is quite broad.
Sure. I'm just sharing this now. Okay, so this is like a still from Reclamation, and these gas masks I got at like an army supply store. And actually I used it in another video, but basically, like, obviously in the future, like, they're still dealing with like a damaged planet, so the air quality is not great, and they're still cleaning the water and stuff like that. So, and this is they're kind of like, this is actually like a scene where they're like having a good day, and they're like looking at all the happy things that are going on in their reclaimed, like, not utopia, but like, I guess not a dystopia either. It's like, because it's hopeful, but it's like apocalyptic at the same time. And then this one is from my video, Less Lethal Fetishes. And it's the same gas mask as the other gas mask. It's just a very handy prop. Plus I paid a lot for it, so I wanted to get my money's worth. But this video, it's kind of humorous, but it's kind of sexy, and it's kind of dark, but also it's talking about the situation that was at the Whitney with Canders, where like, for people who don't know, he was a manufacturer, or he is probably still a manufacturer of tear gas that was used in like Palestine and Standing Rock and at the US-Mexico border and in Ferguson. And he was kind of art washing his money by giving a lot of money to the Whitney and being on the board. And the Whitney Biennial I was in, we were being asked to boycott or like withdraw our work to force him off the board. And there was like, it was a really difficult thing to decide like what we were going to do. And like the other artists and I were like talking in like private chats about how to handle it, because like we didn't want to like co-sign this like, war profiteer. Is really difficult. And then in the end, 8 people did withdraw, and like that, I think it was like a couple days later, or maybe even the next morning, he stepped down from the board. So he did leave in the end, and I was like so relieved. But at the same time, you wonder like how about complicity in problematic art institutions, and where funding comes from, and what that means politically. This one is a still from my 2-channel installation, and this section here is basically telling a story about my grandfather. How many greats is it? My great grandfather was the war chief at the Battle of Cut Knife Hill, and he was injured during the battle, and he was healed with a bear cub robe that was in a medicine bundle. So that story was written down by Fine Day, and this part of the video was like talking about that story. And then this part, I was just doing research one day, and I found out that a whole bunch of stuff about Scottish witches and witchcraft. And so I was doing research, and I was looking up witches that were tried and executed that had like my family's last names. Like it's not my last name, my like like my grandma's, like I think it was this was a Sinclair, and she was executed for like doing this like basically like folk magic. Like I think she did like it was like a spell to protect cattle, and she was caught and tried and executed. So is kind of comparing the fact, like the two different kinds of magic, like from Scottish magic, and like how colonization kind of like twisted that into this like persecution of women, and then this other magic that was used to like heal somebody who was like in a battle against colonization, basically. And then the last shot I am sharing is, this is from Extractions, and it's me mixing a fertility shot, because I was doing this thing where I was trying to get eggs retrieved and fertilize them. And we recently tried to fertilize them and they didn't work. But it was like the whole situation of like getting the eggs retrieved involved like taking shots like every day for like 2 weeks and getting into this routine. But the video isn't just about that. It's also about resource extraction and how Indigenous children are also being treated like a resource and extracted for sort of like the child welfare system to pay for, you know, social workers and things like that. Like it's an industry. So I was talking about that too. So that is what I have to share.
Incredible. Both of you, well, before I ask one more question, I need to tell the audience as well that you're welcome to ask questions. There's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Click in there. Do not put it in the chat, just in the Q&A button. And you can send questions and we will open it to the floor near the end of our conversation so that you all have a chance to speak to these brilliant women. I always think that both of you keep your work close to the chest, you know, close to home or very personal, but speaks to a really larger view on society and life. Darlene, telling stories, creating gorgeous imagery from your community and lands, deeply generous work. Thirza, deeply personal meditations that speak to colonization, love, sexuality, and often using humor inside like dark truths. Why is your way of working important to you, and how hard or easy has it been? Start with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it's been, I mean, I think I go back and forth between like serious and humorous, and in some ways the humorous stuff is easier on me because it's like it doesn't take as much out of me emotionally. But when I do harder stuff, like talking about like my cousin being blinded in that film site, like that it's really heavy stuff to deal with sometimes. And then sometimes I wonder like what is the point of putting out trauma, but then it's like also that's just in like our stories. That's like, you know, like I had this joke with somebody where it was like you know, your life is triggering to me. And, you know, like you can't just tell somebody that they can't tell their story just because it's like a dark story and you think everything should be light and happy.
Mm-hmm. I think half the time we struggle with that question, not because we're necessarily struggling inside, but it's because we're always thinking about how it's going to be received.
Mm.
Darlene?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it right there. What you're saying, Wanda, is like in your work and what you do is and there's is the same. It's like, but you know, everything you put out, you're responsible for, right? So that narrative that you're sharing, you know, as I share, it must be mine in a way so that I'm responsible for what I'm sharing, but also that it's, you know what I mean, even though that we are still like, I think about my early work and I think about, you know what I mean, what there was this constant battle inside to exist, you know what I mean, just to be seen. And then as you change your work, you change that, you know what I mean, what you're trying to respond. But in the same time, like when we look around what's happening, we still are battling to be heard in our way, right? And even though that there's a lot of talk around perspective and that, but there's still a control in a sense where I think as artists we want I want to be able to find ways of not having to say something just because somebody wants it to be said. I want it to be explored and nurtured and respected, um and coming at it in a different way. So some may say, you know what I mean, and say, like the what we all say is trauma, but this is reality. You know what I mean? This is our everyday realities that we're talking about. So it's not just simply a word. This is what we see every day and experience every day. So yeah, so just keeping and challenging myself in that way, and just being responsible for that, for the work that, and to be incredibly lucky to be able to see the world and share, you know what I mean, it with people in that way.
Yeah, I remember being in a screening in Peterborough, and we do tell hard stories about what, what we've been through. And Leanne Simpson and I were sitting like near each other, and we both had our kids there. And I heard a non-native woman behind basically berating us as bad parents for having our kids present for a hard trauma story kind of film that our people had made. And I think it was Leanne. I don't remember exactly who said it, but somebody turned around and said, that's just your privilege. That allows your kids to be protected from these things. Our kids already live and know this, And it was like an interesting moment of clash in terms of this exact thing, right? This sense that this is reality. We're just telling what is happening in many, many ways. One of the contexts in which you work, Darlene, is the kind of larger kind of film world where you have to get funding for large fiction projects and things like that. And I know that you have made a very ethical, strong stance to work from your community. And I wonder if you could speak a bit about that and the kind of struggles that happen in that sense, but also the triumphs that happen in terms of storytelling.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I've always made a commitment to myself in the way that, I wanted to stay in my community, and I wanted to work with my community, and I wanted to be able to try to grow, you know what I mean, and grow something with the people around me. And so we started the studio and, made films from here. And part of that has always been, and I think about it because like we hear so much on, you know what I mean, Twitter and all the social media about, you know what I mean, about, perspective, and you know what I mean, on all of those wonderful words and terminologies and all of, but I think when I think about it, it's like that fundamental, place that I grew up in is like, and I think about my father and the work that, you know what I mean, he has done, and the work as a chief and as a leader and as a community member and as a father. And then I think about even my mother, and on just like, you know what I mean, and our families here in the community. And it's like, of course that would naturally happen. You know what I mean? We'd want to work with our people, and we do work with our people. So that's where I came from, and that's what I grew up with, was is that you know what I mean, that we as a community, we grow and we take care of each other. So that making a feature film is sometimes very difficult because there's a, you know what I mean, a sense that, feature films are very hard to make, and there's a little bit of a hierarchy that's involved in that. So it's always difficult to put kind of like this community cyclic ideology into this hierarchy of filmmaking. But we keep at it, and we keep growing, and changing that those ways of how we work, with community and in community, but always making those fundamental, I don't really hate to say that fundamental, but always understanding the protocols that come from the community, and just like the way that you were going to work in the community, and letting the ones who are not from the community understand that this isn't, you just don't go anywhere. You just don't do whatever you want. You know what I mean? You need permission, and you need to understand. And it's like kind of like no trace camping idea. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to go somewhere, don't leave your garbage, don't leave a mess, and it's just respecting it. But I think too is like there's a part of me which is really difficult because you're bringing this into the community. So I always remind myself and the crew is like, we don't want to disturb their daily life. We want to be able to do these things and create, but let's not, you know what I mean, try to change anybody's life directly. So the film is not the most important thing of the day. It's the community. And so we try to just keep working on that and working through that in that way.
Amazing. I was thinking about when you were telling me about the shots in She Falls Around Her, when you get shots of the land or ice breaking up or different kinds of long takes in the film, and the conversation that you had with your editor who didn't understand the importance of that within the narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and it's through dialogue, you know what I mean? Like it's those fundamental things where, and it's like creating space within all of that. But I think sometimes it's challenging. Like, yeah, it's like I'm gonna put a 5-minute piece of, you know what I mean, like water running. It's like, no, you're supposed to change, you know what I mean? Like sometimes those things happen, but I think like what happens is that once you start working in those collaborations and with these amazing people, that they start to understand your narrative, and then you start to understand exactly what you're trying to say, and challenging those, you know what I mean, past kind of ideas of how film should be, and what, you know what I mean, what we're kind of like, how we should tell our story. We should be able to tell our stories the way we want.
Yeah, and it's amazing how long it's taking to try. But one of the ways of working independently and working more in a video art context, I think you do get a bit more control over the narrative, and you get a lot more control over what you're doing, especially if you hold on to the script, the performance, the editing, and everything like you do, Thirza. I was wondering about, you tackled some very radical, groundbreaking things in your work around sexuality, around madness. And I was wondering, how, I know personally, like just even having been in foster care or things like this, like I don't share my personal life because I always feel like people are just going to have a preconceived idea of who I am. How's that experience been, putting your stuff like straight out there for people to see?
Yeah, people kind of always ask me about like what it's like to do personal work. I mean, I think I've been doing it for so long, I don't really notice like a difference. I did notice like I keep a blog, like I've been writing a blog since like 2004, and I think the things I talk about have shifted. Like I have more rules around not to talk about my relationships with other people, just because I think it invades your privacy. But like in my video work, I don't know, I think the reason I use personal stories so much is just because I find you can like reach people easier when you like reveal something about yourself and like are vulnerable, like because a lot of the personal stories I talk about have like larger implications like politically. So talking about, like my experience in like a psych ward, or you know, things like that. I think it adds sort of like this intimacy that people have with the work, where they can't just, you're not just lecturing them, you're like kind of giving them a sense of what it feels like to be impacted by these larger political forces, and sort of like isms in the world like racism and homophobia and transphobia and all that kind of thing. Yeah, and I think also I kind of like just talking about myself, because when when I like talk with my friends, like I have a lot of friends who really like to talk and they don't ask me very many questions, so it's kind of like I make videos so that I can say something.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that one of the things that I was thinking about too is even when I first saw your very, very early videos, as I mean, we're the same age, right? So you were making them as I was encountering them, and gave me a real sense of seeing something that represents more what happens inside my head or in my body or in my sexuality than what I had seen in anything else. Was that part of what drove you? Is that you couldn't see yourself represented?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much that, like from the very first video, it was like, because I remember when I was trying to figure out if I was a lesbian back in like 1992. I was going to say 2000. I was like, oh my God, it's 1992 that was going on. Yeah, I was trying to figure out if I was a lesbian, and I was like 14 years old, and I just didn't think it was possible at the time, because we don't, like, we have so much representation now, but at the time there's like no teenage lesbians anywhere.
Exactly.
So when I finally, it was actually a Sassy article that made me realize I could be a lesbian. Sassy was this like girl mag that was kind of like kind of punk, but also still mainstream. But it had this article like I was a teenage lesbian, and sort of this girl talking about coming out. And yeah, so it was kind of like I just didn't want that to happen to somebody else where they didn't see themselves. Which is funny because like it screened in like a bunch of queer film festivals, but obviously like my work was not going to be on TV at that point, because it was really like raw, and you know, and it didn't have the production values, and it just, you know, and also I think, yeah, and I think it got rated like parental accompaniment or something, because it went to some festival and they had to rate it, and I was just kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, it was basically the whole like reason I make work is like for representation, like not just like being a lesbian or a teenage lesbian or whatever, but it's like, you know, indigenous representation, and like more broad queer representation, and especially these days I've been really focusing on like two-spirit community representation. So it's not just like my experience of being two-spirit, but more like a broader look at our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you guys have questions for each other? I never really allowed for that as we were talking along. I want to make sure that you guys can jump in at any point and respond to each other too.
I can't think of it. We're on the spot.
I know, it's like just throwing it out there, but if you do, just jump in whenever. Like you don't have to follow a specific structure, even though I'm being your guide.
Excellent.
I have wondered about, I mean, the role of an institution like Imaginative, right, here in Toronto, but also for both of your careers, in terms of being a space where we could create work, show work, and have a conversation with an Indigenous audience for the most part, and especially in its beginning. How has that had an influence or an impact in your careers and your work? Let's start with you. Okay, so
Okay, either is okay. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it like made me like think about audience differently, because like when an Indigenous audience is engaging with Indigenous work, it's just you don't have to do so much work to explain things, and it made me less likely to over explain things, like whereas I kind of tend to do that for like a mainstream audience. But I just kind of think like, I don't know, like, why do we have to like always explain things to a mainstream audience? Why can't we make things for like Indigenous gazes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've often thought about that. Darlene?
Yeah, no, I think like, you know, especially for like imaginative, and I think as somebody who's not in an urban, as an artist not in an urban center, it's really difficult. So there was years when, you know, just being here on the res, and just life seems to pass you by, and then you're like, you're not connected, and you're not, you know what I mean, and you might get a thing here and there, but then it's always was, you know what I mean, like especially curators like yourself, and other people who are doing all of this work and connecting, and telling, you know what I mean, but also like when you had a chance, and like imaginative was, you know what I mean, there. And for me, there was a time when between my two feature films where I was just like struggling to come up with another film that was actually, you know what I mean, good. And but I was also concentrating on different stuff like community work. And so that connection, being able to know, and just being able to watch, you know what I mean, what other people were doing was really important as an outsider. And just allowed me to connect. And I'm kind of excited because, like, you know what I mean, as we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but you know, I always thought this is like COVID is allowing us to connect to the communities in a way. And so being able to screen differently now, and platforms opening, you know what I mean, and newer ideas coming out, and people pushing to just like, you know, connect. It's just like, oh geez, like this is what we've been waiting for, because this is how we've been wanting to connect, you know what I mean. And I'm not as isolated as some other communities, you know what I mean, but I very much grew up with not being able to see how, you know what I mean, and being connected all the time, and being networked, or being, you know what I mean, within that you know, urban and kind of like city sense. So being able to find ourselves and sharing work in a larger sense that come into the houses is really kind of, it's really exciting to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of enjoyed the online festival.
Yeah, I hope we get to go here more. Well, I hope we get to go back to life, like, you know, in some sense, like come together. But I hope that we continue to think that we don't have to be in one space to present, that we can be in many spaces. Although at the same time, I do like that, you know, sitting in a theater or being in a gallery, but being able to share with people who can't be there, you know.
Absolutely. We have found that even with our education programs, because they're online, well, when there's more subscribers, but they're actually coming from remote areas, so not from the city. So when you're local, it's like, it tends to, yeah, it's like where your environment is. But now people have access to stuff that they didn't have access to before, which is exciting as a creator, because you'll learn more about what it is you've made through other eyes and perspectives that you don't normally hear from, right?
Totally.
If you're only getting a Q&A in a Toronto audience, can you imagine?
Yeah.
It impacts things.
Yeah.
what you think you made, you're just like, what is that what I made?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're like, when you're in these smaller communities showing your films and they're laughing, and then you go into another area and they're like, huh? You're
Yeah.
like, okay.
Completely.
Yes.
One of the things I think in terms of our work being developed in kind of a unique way is that it has multiple influences. And with Thirza, I know one of the things that excited me about your work is this kind of confluence of performance art that comes out in your video practice, and then also you also perform. But how did you come into that? And I know you've made films about Laurie and like putting Laurie Blondeau and other folks that have influenced you into them. So I wondered if you could speak a bit about where that comes from.
The performance, I guess, you know, is I was actually I think of myself as like a reluctant performance artist, because I started out in video, but I was always, just because I was talking about such specific experiences like being Indigenous and queer, and you know, like, and butch and all those things, like there's like not really somebody I wanted to substitute in for myself, so I just used myself as like an actor in most of my videos. And then somebody was like, oh, we want to like curate you in this performance art festival because your videos are like performance art anyway. And I was like, okay. And that was like 20 years ago, actually. And then I just kind of like kept doing it. But I was always kind of like, why am I here? Why do I do this? Why do I do this to myself? Because I'm really like a shy person. So I actually hate being on stage, but it's just kind of like, I just do it because it's like a thing that needs to be done for some reason. But yeah, like I've always really been interested in sort of like performing as this person with multiple intersecting identities that can be oppressed, and trying to find like sort of like the joy in that, but also sometimes like my performances and my videos can be like quite like dark, like being under a whole bunch of dirt and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I guess just I think video art and performance art, they just like, they're really like, they have a lot of overlap, and they go together really well. And I think also too, like just from like seeing all that like 70s video art that was like really like mostly like performance art also. I think that probably influenced me.
I was thinking about the yeah, the just well, I think maybe there's also not enough kind of examples of what you're trying to create as you're creating. And in that context, I was wondering, who would you consider as influences, or people who've kind of, you know, paved the way for you, or who you still look to, that kind of thing? Because I'm always interested in alternative, you know, canons, because we build our own, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely like Shauna Dempsey and Laurie Milan were big influences. And of course, they're also like performance artists who also do video and film. And then also Dana Claxton was a huge influence. And she also does performance and also film. So it's just, yeah, it's kind of interesting. People who like mix those two things tend to be the people I really gravitate towards. And then there's just like sort of filmmakers like Todd Haynes and you know, people like that. A lot of the 90s queer cinema I was into. Yeah, and then just like queer video art from like random places. I can't even, but mostly like Dana Claxton and Shauna and Laurie were like the, I think, biggest influences in my early career for sure.
Awesome. I'm going to shoot the same question to you, Darlene.
Influences. I would say like early influences were obviously like filmmakers who were being able to like place community and within their settings. And so like Scorsese, and then but just like a lot of like European filmmakers. You know, I dove deep into that because I could access that. And then once I was able to find our own people and our own makers, then it was definitely like because I not only do film, I do writing too. So you know, we both share a common love for Visner. And so a lot of, yeah, so a lot of like, yeah, thinkers like that. But like, you know, even when I think about like just the way people present it and are just straight putting things out in a really deeper way, but also that it's just like bang out, like, you know what I mean? Rebecca Belmore, you know, just like when, you know, you are just, there's no explanation, it's just there, and you have to go through that work, you know. And then but also, you know what I mean, like those the works by like Alanis, you know what I mean, like just committed to community, committing to storytelling, committing, you know, to finding the truth within, and but able to find change within their work, like, you know, changing things and influencing. So those kind of, that's always been an influence in a way. But definitely it's always been like, yeah, this being able to tell a story without having to over explain it, and it just be there. Yeah. And then my love of like poetry and landscape.
I love poetry.
And Visner.
And Gerald Visner. We're both working on a film on him right now. But COVID kind of put an end to that.
Yeah.
To the final shooting that we had to do.
I know.
But it will come. It will come. This is one way in which we also tribute to people that influence us, is to put them in our work, or make work about them, or some kind of little cameo appearance. How was it working with like a titan like Tantu Cardinal, Darlene? I was like thinking about this because I think she said this was her first starring role.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's
yeah.
just
From all those years, when I first worked with Tantu on a feature film, one of my kind of bigger feature films, and she walked onto the set, and she just like, and she just commands, like, you know what I mean, like when she walks into a room and onto set, and she's so there and so present. And I was like, you know, it was like the first time I'd ever made a really big feature film, so I was like, my head was like all over. And then she came into the room and she's like, okay, Darlene, like, tell me what to do. You know what I mean? What's going on? And I was like, oh, like, I'm just like okay, this is it, you know what I mean? So, but being able to like, yeah, she's just like has this presence where I just it's amazing how people can like, yeah, command a room, but also like have that presence where the camera really loves them, you know what I mean? And that's a really bad word for it to say, but it's just like they can like, when I was directing, I was just like, let the camera, you know, find her, and let her find the camera, like, because she naturally knows how to work within that scene. And so when you just let those moments happen, that is so powerful. And like, I think of our last scene where you know what I mean, the Tantu just did like, you know, 16-hour days for 20 days, and it was just crazy mud and snowstorms and ice storms. And she was like, yeah, she is in the film. That's all she, you know, I think there's one scene that she's not in, and a couple of birch trees. And yeah, and I was just like, yeah, and it was just like the sun was falling, and she was just standing out in this in the swamp, and I was just like, she just like fell right into this, like, you know what I mean, right into the shot. And I was like, it was just beautiful. Yeah. So, but it's scary because you have to catch up as a creator, like, because you have to be better, you have to be a better you can't just be the old you of when you were, you know what I mean, like, you're constantly working on your craft, because now it's a larger picture. And so when you're able to work with people who are, you know what I mean, like that, like Tantu, you have to be ready. So yeah, so it was quite an honor.
Yeah, I think that, well, I think maybe the audience was a little intimidated to ask questions, so we don't have any questions from the internet universe. I've been paying attention, but we are nearing the end of our time. Is there any last words? Whoa, that just sounded ominous. Let me rephrase that. It's been amazing talking to both of you. I think you're brilliant and very healthy. Is there anything you would like to say before we close?
I think just that I miss Saskatchewan, but I know I have to be in Toronto right now, but because of the film tax credit and everything. But it's weird, like when I think about the films I've been making here, like they're still about Saskatchewan. And I don't know, it's strange being on somebody else's territory and still trying to make films about my home territory.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, wow. I'm excited because like my new work, aside from that documentary, is going in a totally different direction. And yeah, just pushing myself in a way that is very far away from Falls Around Her, but kind of going back to the earlier work that I did, like installation wise. So just kind of mixing new ideas and I guess the value of my older work. So I'm excited. Yeah. So it's going to be totally something totally different, and yeah, a different way of telling stories for Darlene.
Yay. I'm very excited to see all of your next projects from both of you, and also to engage you in the AGO universe. So thanks again for being here. I want to thank also TD Ready Commitment, and is our lead sponsor of talks and performances, for generously supporting this talk. And thank you to the audience for listening and chiming in. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Wanda Nanibush, Anishinaabe from Bow Slave First Nation. See you all later.
Thanks.
Big watch.